I'm Laurel Zanobi, a senior researcher, and this is UX Pursuit.
Welcome to UX Pursuit, a podcast dedicated to the unique stories and journeys of UX practitioners. How they got where they are today, what hurdles they overcame, and what advice they have for those currently pursuing UX. I'm Tim Bridgham, your host, and my hope is that these conversations might help and inspire those who are currently in their own pursuit of a UX career. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Laurel with you. We actually met when I was in grad school when she was kind enough to help out with one of my team projects. As you'll hear, Laurel continues to find ways to help UX students or those trying to break into a UX career. We spoke back in the fall of 2020, shortly after her book, I Want a UX Job, came out.
Well, Laurel, thank you so much for taking time today to be on the podcast. Really excited to chat with you about your story, especially in light of this new book that you've written. So we'll get all into that, but let's maybe start a little bit earlier in the process or earlier in your journey. Where did your UX journey begin?
Yeah, my UX journey began in Washington, D.C. I had just graduated with my master's degree, and my partner and I had moved to D.C. so he could work for the federal government. And I, thankfully, after only 6 months of unemployment, got a position at the American Anthropological Association, which was really exciting because my background is in anthropology and archaeology. So I came from those humanities, and so many of my recent colleagues, previous cohorts at my school had also just graduated and they weren't finding jobs. They were trying to find professorships and postdocs and just, struggling with the academic job market.
Okay.
So I felt very grateful to, secure a position in my field. It didn't pay great, but you know what? It was a job, and fresh out of grad school, I had no complaints. And it was a really great experience. I enjoyed the work there, but I started to see the work that my partner was doing with the government and meeting other user researchers who were working with the government and in other tech spaces in the DC area. And I just kept thinking, oh, this is really neat. They're doing all the things that I was trained to do. They call them different things, of course, but the focus on ethnography and identifying people's needs and building the right solution for those needs is something that anthropology trains you to do. It's really focused on the contextual needs of a group and how to make something that's culturally appropriate for them. So I started to see all these overlaps between what folks in the private sector and in tech and in civic tech and gov tech were doing. And I thought, oh, that's really neat. That's what I want to do. At the same time, I was also working on a bunch of legacy systems at the nonprofit, and it's just as a user of those systems myself, I was really frustrated with, things that I knew could be better.
Right.
And so those two simultaneous, those two things in my brain at the same time started to coalesce, and I got really interested in this career of user research. I had heard about it in undergrad. I knew researchers work in companies like Toyota and at all the big medical device companies, and I'd heard about it, but never really understood, how do you get into it?
Okay.
And so I started to basically build up my understanding of how does one, with the training that I have or the skill sets that I have, get into this new exciting job market called UX research.
So you mentioned sort of in your undergrad and your master's degree really trained you or gave you skill sets that seemed to match what you saw in UX research. So did you feel like, oh, okay, this should just be an easy switch? I just need to make the right contacts, or what were you thinking at this point?
I think that's what people always hope for when they're making a career change, right? The skills I have will be a one-to-one translation. And I think with my background, that was largely true, but I had no illusions of grandeur. I realized this was going to be an interesting process of having to reframe my experiences and skill sets into something that made sense in the non-academic world. Because in academia, we use a lot of jargon. We use words that don't make sense to anybody outside of that discipline. Even within the university, you might have one department calling the same thing by a completely different word. So I was really aware that the names that I have for the skill sets and the experiences that I have might not translate one-to-one into a UX research career. So what I started to do was reach out and talk to people and get a sense of, all right, how do you talk about your job? How do you talk about the work that you do? What is your background? And I turned it into its own sort of research project. To understand, hey, all right, you have a similar background to me. You came from a social sciences discipline. How did you do this? And after a couple of those conversations, I got a sense of what sort of words to use and what sort of things to think about, what kinds of questions to ask. And after each of those conversations, I would ask for a reference to a new book, or what sort of resource should I read? What website was really useful when you were making your transition? Where do you find jobs? All these questions that percolate as you're making a career change.
Right. What were some of those maybe impactful or really, really helpful tools that you found, or websites, references, books that you found in this process?
Yeah. Chris Oliver keeps this monster list of UX books, which is this giant Airtable spreadsheet with every single UX book that has ever been written.
Oh, wow.
It is very useful. I highly recommend looking that up. It has all the classics, the Don't Make Me Think, and the Design of Everyday Things, and Interviewing Users, and the hallmark UX books that I think many of us are aware of. If you just Google UX book, this is the list of the top 10 books that come up, and all the famous authors that we have heard about. And those were really useful for building out, the skill set or understanding the methodology. But what I found extra useful from these conversations that I had with folks is the communities that they would point me to. So online communities, look for these LinkedIn groups, look for these Facebook groups. The Mixed Methods Slack group is, single-handedly the best resource I found during that transition period, because it's such a large community. Mm-hmm. And each time I found a new community, that opened up 10 more doors. And so through slowly getting my feet wet with, all right, who are the players in this sphere? Where do they all go? Where do they all hang out? Where do they all talk to each other? That pointed me in many, many directions. And so I was able to, with one conversation, open up 10 different doors. And then each of those doors would open up, X number more doors. So it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy, self-replicating cycle. I don't know what the right way to say that is, but
okay.
Yeah, online communities.
Yeah, I mean, was that overwhelming to kind of these 10 doors, and which door do you go down, and which, was that something that you struggled with at all, or?
I mean, the transition into UX research basically turned into a full-time job.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But it was exciting because it was really novel, and if you're interested in making the transition to a new career, I think that passion and excitement and losing yourself in that process it can be really exhilarating. Okay. And so it was overwhelming for sure, but it was also really exciting. And there was a probably 6-month period where my weekends were just informational interviews, and I would spend all my evenings reading books and taking mini courses online and reading up on methodologies, or going to meetups and practicing usability testing in small groups. It was an interesting and intense 6-month period when I really dived in.
Yeah. You were doing all this in the DC area?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And so there must be a thriving kind of UX community there, at least enough to get you started.
For sure. I think most major cities have a really robust UX community, especially those that center around any sort of technology industries. And if there are universities that also have really strong humanities or UX departments, I've found that they have really robust communities, and people are really interested in meetups and going out for coffee and informational interviews and all the good stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So you're meeting all these people, you're doing your own, part-time job where you're researching all these different things. What was kind of the next step in your process?
Well, that's when I started haphazardly applying for jobs.
Okay.
Which if you read that part in my book, you'll realize why I recommend people don't do that.
Okay.
Which is, when I thought I had a good enough grasp of the skills and how to talk about my experiences, I went through the build your beautiful portfolio and over design your resume phase and apply for every single job with UX in the title, even if it's not a good fit. And that was very dispiriting. And obviously, if you talk to any career coach, regardless of your field, they'll tell you that buckshot approach of just sending out your resume to every company in the world just doesn't work. And it turns into a waste of your own time. And so that was probably a 3-month period or so after that initial 6-month period where I was very discouraged because I felt I wasn't doing it the right way, but I didn't know a better way to do it. Right.
Right. Okay. And I understand you went to General Assembly. Was that a part of that process when you were doing research and kind of honing these skills, or when did that come into play?
Yeah, this is interesting. I did a weekend course through General Assembly, and folks often come to me and ask, is the boot camp worth it? And I always ask them, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do research or do you want to do design? If you want to do research, I don't know, it's a mixed bag. They generally teach you the fundamentals of design with a dash of research. So if you're interested in moving into a UX design career, I think it's a really great avenue to do that. Where General Assembly came in for me, though, was during my portfolio building phase. I didn't take the course because I thought I needed the skill set because I had that background.
Okay.
And by that point, I knew how to talk about that background. But what I wanted was a dedicated weekend where I knew I would do nothing except make a portfolio piece and get to practice those skills.
Okay.
So I think my experience with General Assembly is not what most people's experience will be, because I didn't use it for the intended purposes. It was an off-label use as a project time that was dedicated, 4 hours on a weekend to make a portfolio piece.
Yeah, well, it seems like a really great way to help get some experience in air quotes when lots of job applications or job descriptions say, you must have 2 years of experience. And it's like, well, I just graduated college. How do I have 2 years of experience, getting a job? So it sounds like that was sort of a way for you to get some project work or start to craft a way to help showcase maybe what you've done in the past. Were you able to apply that to some of your previous work as an anthropologist?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that is a great way to think about it. And I was able to basically speak to the skills that I already had as an anthropologist through that portfolio piece in a way that perhaps others without that background might not be able to do in just a short weekend class.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've done this boot camp and you've been applying for lots of things. I don't know when the boot camp happened in this. I don't know if it was in this buckshot time period that you
right
mentioned.
before
it. Okay. So what you said, it was kind of discouraging because you were just sending resumes and applications into the ether, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what happened next.
Out into the black hole. Well, I did that for a while. And then I started to just get real discouraged. And so I stopped doing that, which was a good choice. And then what I started to do was look at the communities that I had been pointed to and explore job opportunities through those. They tell you, it's really hard to get in through the front door at any company generally. It's usually who you know, whether you are friends with people at the company or have an internal reference. Like that is the best way to get into any sort of job. Love it or hate it, humans are relational creatures. We thrive on community. That's just kind of in our DNA. So what I started to do was actually just reach out to people and those specific job boards in those communities I had joined to try to get more warm handoffs for jobs, I guess is a good way to say it. Build the relationship with the people who are posting the jobs.
Right.
Reach out to them, ask what are they looking for in this position? What are they hoping to get out of a new colleague? And those conversations turned out to be much better. Those are the ones that I actually got interviews out of. And even if I didn't get that job, at least it was an interview and it was practice, right? Which is its own sort of research project of how do I do a good job at an interview? And you get to learn from that process of, all right, I shouldn't say that answer anymore to that question, or, oh, this is the right way to approach the interview. So that was a much more effective, targeted way of getting my foot in the door.
Okay. And then I assume that led to someone offering you a job in UX research, or having the title of UX research?
It did, yeah. So that is actually how I got my current position at Ad Hoc LLC, where I've been for over 3 years, almost 3.5, which is really exciting. The research director at the time, it was a very small research practice area, but she had posted in the Mixed Methods Slack channel that they were opening up a job for a mid-level position. And I reached out to her and we had a conversation, and it was really great. And then I interviewed and I realized the other 2 researchers who had been hired were also anthropologists. And it was really exciting to be able to be across a table from somebody who's interviewing you who has the same background as you, because they know what you've been through to get to this point in the research transition, this career change.
Yeah.
But they also understand what skill sets you bring, which is something that I really recommend to people who are making this transition. Is, we all came from very different backgrounds into this field. Generally, very few of us have a specific UX degree, though that is becoming more common. So it's very likely that the people who are interviewing you might have the same background as you. So if you can find those companies where you know that the hiring committee has researchers with a psychology degree, you know that the hiring committee come from a library science or other sorts of social studies, you can leverage that to sort of make that connection with them, because they can understand where you're coming from. They know the jargon that you know, they know what sort of background and skills you bring to the table.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know. Just keeps seeming to come back to these relationships and how important they are. Do you have tips or recommendations for kind of the best way to go about trying to develop these relationships, or maybe even things to avoid when trying to make connections?
Yeah, reach out and be curious and brave, but also be really respectful. Lots of us are really busy. And I think that goes for any discipline. People have lives and families and stuff going on outside of their careers. So recognize when somebody takes an hour out of their time to meet up for coffee or a phone call, that's really great. That's really generous of them. So reaching out to people and being curious and honest and upfront about what you want. Hey, I want to talk to you about your career transition. I saw that you work at this company, you come from this background. I'd love to pick your brain for half an hour. And that gets you lots of responses. Just keep it short and sweet and simple, really actionable. The worst thing you can do is send somebody who is busy a 3-page long email about how you want them to answer all of these questions in the email. And it's just like, I don't have time to sit for an hour and write an email, but I will happily sit for half an hour and have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. Like you said, everyone's busy, but I think definitely when people respect our time, or, and I was doing that too, just trying to be like, hey, I love any bit of time, a coffee, that sort of thing, that is definitely great advice. I know now that I'm working and like in it, and like sometimes you're just like heads down, like, hey, I'm reporting now. I'm buried in data. Let me reach out back, when I've come up from air.
Right.
Cool. So I think one thing that's really interesting, or at least I feel like sort of resonates a little bit with my transition, is that, well, like for me, I was like already working at a UX firm. I wasn't doing research, but I was kind of already like in the door, which is awesome. So I feel really fortunate that happened. For you, it sounds like you were sort of already at least had the skill set because you had that educational background and even some job training in that. What do you say to people who like, hey, they discover UX research, but maybe their background doesn't exactly, their skill set doesn't exactly translate, or they haven't exactly done a bunch of ethnographic research?
I think it depends so much on who you are and where you're at in your life. The thing that really helped me, even with my background, is I was able to bring a lot of UX work into my day job. So I could make the justification of doing more consumer research and understanding our product and making changes to our technology. That kind of fell under my job responsibilities in my day job, which was really helpful because that, even if it wasn't a UX research title in my resume, was still on the job experience, and I can turn it into a portfolio piece, which was great. If you don't have that opportunity to kind of carve out a position or that experience in your day job, it really depends on who you are and where you're at. Folks really can do great if they go and get a master's degree or do one of those boot camps, but that might not be in the cards for everyone. You might have kids, you might already have too much student debt and you don't want to take on more. But if you're 23 and you get funding to go get a grad degree and you want a master's degree anyways, like great, that's great opportunity. And some people thrive really well in that more structured learning environment. So if that's what you need to build your skill set, great, go do that. There's lots of good programs. You can even go abroad and do like a 1-year-long master's program. I have a lot of colleagues and friends who have done that. Just an excuse to go live in London, which is great.
Yeah, that sounds really nice.
Which is totally great. But if you have, say you're 45 and you have 2 kids and you aren't at the point in your life where you really want to go back to school full time, see if you can volunteer or even take, weekend classes. The boot camps can be a really great option if you need something part-time. There's so many different ways to make your own experiences happen that you can use as portfolio pieces and justification on your resume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, just, maybe if you don't have the exact background, that, they say like, oh, a graduate degree in this, or, you obviously have to learn some of those skills, but I think there is a great value in the skills you maybe learn through your education or through other jobs that could translate, that bring a unique perspective. So don't sell yourself short on, oh, I'm an IT guy. I can't switch to that. But knowing that, sometimes researchers, you're in there in the field, you got to know how to handle all the technology to be able to do your usability testing. So if you can translate that skill, then great, and you can leverage that for yourself. Then at least that's how I partly did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because you are an IT person doesn't mean you're not talking to the people who are using your systems or your website. And if you can make the argument that when you talk to even your internal users as an IT person, you're doing user research to some degree, and if you're iterating on your systems or making improvements based on their feedback, that counts. That's experience. And it might not be direct what you might think of as user research or UX experience, but it is, that's the outcome of this kind of work, is we're making improvements for people's lives. And it doesn't really matter what we call it. The outcome is what matters.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So you've been working at Ad Hoc for a couple years. And then you decided to write a book, or what happened? How did that come up? Did someone?
Yeah, you just wake up one day and decide you want to write a book because that's a great idea. What happened is I, as one of the first handful of researchers at our company, folks were really interested in kind of getting out the word about our research practice area. And as somebody who came from academia, work was interested in a blog post, essentially, of highlighting the types of folks that work for us.
Okay.
So I wrote a blog post about how I moved from academia into UX research. And it got lots of reads, and people kept reaching out to me asking how, I did it and how they could do it, what advice I might have for them. After about 2 years of that, so I wrote that blog post in 2017, about a year and a half in, I realized, there's a lot of people that reach out to me. Every week somebody is messaging me on LinkedIn or finding my email and sending me an email asking for my advice. After about a year and a half, I realized there's some interest here. And then after about 2 years, I bounced this idea off of friends and colleagues and my husband, and everyone was really excited about the idea of writing a book. And I think at some point it was a little self-serving because I was tired of writing the same email to everyone every week. It's just I need to get this out of my brain onto paper. But I recognized, these are the folks that are able to find me. How many folks out there aren't able to find me, who don't know how to reach out to me to get this advice? So if I can put this into a book form that is more easily distributed, people can come back to it as a reference. This might help people. And if I help 10 people, that's great. That's all I needed. So then I decided to write a book, as one does.
Yeah. I think I saw either on one of your LinkedIn posts or on the website, just the fact that right now there's oodles of books that are on how to do UX research, but not a lot on how to transition to UX research. So that was kind of part of the motivation too, I guess, in there.
Definitely. So I saw the niche, I saw the need, I had the interest. It all kind of came together.
Got it. Yeah. And so now that's live and people can purchase it, right?
Correct. So you can purchase it. You could also get a sample chapter at the book's website, iwantauxjob.com. If you want to read the introduction and see what it's all about, how it might help you, feel free to download a sample chapter there.
Cool. We've talked a lot about your transition to UX research. Is your book, focused on transitioning specifically to UX research, or, for folks who are thinking, hey, maybe design is where I want to go in, or maybe even like project management or UX writing, should they be checking out your book as well?
I think there's a lot in there for anybody who is making a career change. It is specific to UX research, but so much of the content is also relevant to, UI, UX design, to content and technical writing for UX. I think that there's a lot in there for product management folks as well. If you're curious about what your researchers do, or if you want to move into research yourself from product, that is a great resource to check out.
One thing that I would be interested to get your perspective on, especially for folks who are looking to transition into UX, is what are some of the, obviously there's very technical skills that you need to learn, but I think there are probably a lot of soft skills or just a lot of values that we should encompass. From your perspective, what are those traits that you think people pursuing UX should try to embody?
Mm-hmm. Compassion is a big one, I think. People throw around the word empathy, and there's lots of discussion about what does that actually mean? Can you really empathize with somebody whose experiences you might not have? My anthropological training gives me kind of a jaded perspective on we're all biased and we're all going to be biased. The best you can do is call out the bias and try to prevent it. But having a sense of compassion for your users, even if you might not have the same lived experiences, is very useful in my mind. Flexibility is also really useful. I like to say, I have strong opinions that are weakly held. You might have really strong ideas about how a project should go, but that might not be how it can go due to constraints or other limitations. So being flexible and kind of rolling with the punches and keeping the end goal front of mind. The end goal being, all right, we accomplish this for our users, we improve this metric by X percentage, whatever that end goal is, how can you meet that given your constraints? So creativity, flexibility is really useful. Being personable is also great. We're, like I said, we build relationships. So can you build that rapport? Can you adjust to the stakeholders around you, your teammates, to the folks that you're interviewing for your research studies? How do you build those relationships with people?
Yeah, I imagine too that idea of flexibility would be really important just in the transitioning period. Keeping that end in mind, this is what I'm working towards, but knowing that you're going to hit hurdles and you have to be flexible and adjust. Hey, I can't just send out resumes to everyone. I need to adapt. I need to be flexible in what I'm doing. And then you reference the personal connection and trying to leverage that. So I think it's cool to see how not only is it helpful in your job, but helpful in getting a job. So that's great.
It all comes full circle. It's all just mirroring the same process.
Exactly. Awesome. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what's next for you in your UX career. Maybe another book, or I don't know what's next.
Oh, everyone wants another book. Don't know what it would be yet. Not going to write that off. I might write another one in the future should the spirit move me.
Awesome.
Next for me is really just keep on doing the work that I've been doing. I really enjoy the work I'm doing right now with our government contracts and our government partners. It's really important things that go on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know about. And it's nice to be somebody involved in keeping the lights on. We all like that. So growing my teammates and growing our practice area work are things that I'm really involved in. I love mentoring others. So growing those skills, progressing, that's exciting.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think, kudos to you and your team for maybe doing the maybe some people might say not so glamorous. You're not working on the latest, hottest VR technology, but you're making hopefully a form that someone has to fill out to get, disability insurance or, something like that, easier to use and a better process, which is something that hopefully we don't need, but, lots of folks do need, especially during this crazy 2020 that we're living in.
If this pandemic era has taught us anything, it is the value of good UX and good government systems.
Got it. Maybe that's the next book.
Maybe that's the next book.
Or
there are several books that are much better and more articulate about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that could be a whole podcast episode too, which would be super cool to talk about. But yeah, I think thank you so much for sharing your story and giving a little insight into how you did it, and then obviously writing down those thoughts for other people to kind of follow in your footsteps or to try to make their own transition. If people wanted to learn more about you or the book or where they can buy it, how can they do all that?
All the information you could possibly ever want on the book is at iwantauxjob.com. You can contact me there, or you can reach out to me on my own personal website, which is laurelzinobi.com. And feel free to shoot me an email. I'm always happy to answer questions. If you have complaints about the book, send them to my editor, not to me. No, if you have complaints, feedback, anything, I want to hear from you. I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you again for taking time to chat and be on the podcast. Congrats on the book.
Thanks.
And exciting stuff. Hopefully in the future, I'm sure we'll see you up there with the famous names of the people who reviewed and liked your book. So
maybe one day.
Yeah. just keep focused on that.
Eye on the end goal, right?
Yes, eye on the end goal, flexibility, growing those personal relationships, and all that sort of stuff. You got it, Steph.
Yeah, this will be fine.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you again so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tim.
Again, a big thank you to Laurel for coming on the show. Be sure to check out her book at iwantauxjob.com or reach out to connect with Laurel. As she said, I'm sure she'd be happy to chat with you. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. If you're thinking about or are pursuing a career in UX, I hope you find these conversations informative and helpful. You can find UX Pursuit wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now, and if you know others pursuing a UX career, please tell them about the show. If you want to get in touch, you can reach me at hello@uxpursuit.com. And to learn more about me or the show, please go to uxpursuit.com. Also, at the end of the first season, I'm planning a panel discussion to answer your UX career questions. So, if you have questions, please email me at hello@uxpursuit.com, and we'll do our best to cover them in the final episode of the season. Lastly, a big thank you to Irene Barber, a fellow UXer, for creating all the music you hear on the podcast. Be sure to check out her music under the artist name Nearby on Spotify or at nearbymusic.bandcamp.com. Again, thanks for listening. I'm Tim Bridgham, a senior UX researcher, and this is UX Pursuit.